Dallas, Texas. Chuck Norris Karate Studio. September 22, 1975. Monday evening, 6:45 p.m. The training floor is packed with students finishing their advanced class. 70 people spread across the mat, working techniques, drilling combinations, cooling down after an intense 2-hour session. But the energy in the room is about to shift completely. In the corner, near the heavy bags, a conversation is happening that will turn into one of the most talked about moments in Chuck Norris's teaching career. A moment that will teach everyone present a lesson they will carry for the rest of their martial arts journey. A moment that demonstrates the difference between confidence and arrogance, between skill and wisdom, between thinking you are ready and actually being ready. Tommy Richardson, 24 years old, green belt, 18 months of training under his belt. 6 feet tall, 185 pounds, former college wrestler with natural athleticism and aggression that made him dangerous in sparring sessions against students his own level. He had been winning consistently in his belt division. His takedowns were strong. His transitions were quick. His ground control was effective. And slowly, over the past few months, something had been growing inside him. Not just confidence, but something darker. The belief that his natural ability made him special, that his wrestling background gave him advantages his instructor did not understand, that maybe, just maybe, he could challenge Chuck Norris himself. Chuck Norris, 35 years old, 5 feet 10 inches tall, 170 pounds, 6-time undefeated world karate champion who had retired from competition 3 years earlier to focus on teaching and his emerging film career. His tournament record was legendary. 183 wins, 10 losses, most of those losses coming early in his career before he refined his system. He had defeated every major champion of his era. He had developed a fighting style that blended traditional Tang Soo Do with practical street fighting principles learned during his Air Force years. But more than his physical skills, Chuck Norris had something else. Experience. The kind of experience that comes from 10,000 hours of real combat, from facing every type of fighter imaginable, from learning through countless battles what works and what gets you hurt. Tommy had been talking to other students between drills, and his voice had been getting louder, more animated. "I am telling you, wrestling changes everything in martial arts," he said to a group of lower belts who were listening with wide eyes. "All these traditional techniques, all these forms and kata, they do not matter when someone shoots for your legs and takes you down. On the ground, striking means nothing. I have submitted brown belts. I have tapped out black belts in grappling. I honestly think I could take down anyone in this school, maybe even Sensei Norris, if he gave me the chance to use my wrestling." The words hung in the air. Several students glanced nervously toward the front of the studio where Chuck was working with a private student, showing detailed hand positioning for a wrist lock. They hoped Tommy would lower his voice, would realize he was crossing a line. But Tommy was too caught up in his own narrative, too convinced by his recent successes. "Yeah, I know he is the world champion and everything," Tommy continued, "but that is point fighting karate. Sport karate. I am talking about real grappling, real wrestling. Different game entirely. I bet I could shoot in, get his legs, and have him on the ground before he knew what happened. Wrestling is the great equalizer. If you want to see what happened when this confident green belt challenged Chuck Norris, when overconfidence met genuine mastery, and learn the lesson that changed not just Tommy's understanding of martial arts but the perspective of everyone who witnessed what came next, stay with me until the end of the story. This is not about humiliation. This is about education. This is about the moment when theory meets reality, when potential meets experience, and when a young martial artist learns something that cannot be taught through drills or kata. This is a story about respect, and how sometimes respect must be earned through direct experience. One of the senior black belts, a man named Robert who had trained with Chuck for 8 years, overheard Tommy's comments. His face showed concern, not anger. He walked over to Tommy and put a hand on his shoulder. "Brother, you need to be careful with that kind of talk," Robert said quietly. "You are a talented athlete. Your wrestling is good. But you are speaking about things you do not understand yet. Sensei Norris is not just a point fighter. He has trained in multiple systems. He understands grappling. He has worked with judo black belts, with Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioners, with wrestlers like yourself. And more than that, he has real experience. The kind that does not come from training, but from actual confrontations where there are no rules and no referees." Tommy shrugged off the warning. "I am not trying to be disrespectful," he said, his tone defensive. "I am just being honest about what I have observed. Traditional karate has weaknesses. Wrestling exploits those weaknesses. It is just reality." Robert shook his head slowly. "If you truly believe that, then maybe you need to test it. But be prepared for what you might learn." Tommy's expression changed, a mix of excitement and nervousness. Are you saying I should challenge him? Robert met his eyes. I am saying that if you are going to talk like you have been talking, you should be willing to back it up. But understand this. If you challenge Sensei Norris, do it with respect. Do it as a student seeking knowledge, not as someone trying to prove superiority. There is a difference, and that difference matters. Tommy thought about this for a moment. The adrenaline was building. The opportunity to test his theory against the legendary Chuck Norris was too tempting to pass up. He walked across the training floor, his heart pounding, toward where Chuck was finishing his private lesson. The other students noticed, conversations stopping, everyone sensing something significant was about to happen. Tommy stood a respectful distance away, waiting for Chuck to finish. When Chuck turned and saw Tommy standing there with an unusual intensity in his eyes, he smiled warmly. "Tommy, what can I do for you?" His voice was friendly, patient, the voice of a teacher who genuinely cared about his students' development. "Sensei," Tommy began, trying to keep his voice steady. "I would like to request something. I have been working a lot on my wrestling, on takedowns and ground control. And I was wondering if, maybe, you would allow me to test that against you. Not to be disrespectful, but to learn. To see how traditional karate responds to wrestling techniques. I think it would be educational for me and maybe for the other students watching." Chuck Norris studied Tommy's face for a long moment. He had been teaching long enough to recognize what was happening here. This was not humble curiosity. This was ego. But Chuck also understood that sometimes the best teaching comes from experience, not lecture. Sometimes a student needs to feel something to understand it. "Okay, Tommy," Chuck said calmly. "I will give you what you are asking for. But we are going to set some ground rules. This is not a fight. This is a teaching moment. I am going to allow you to attempt your best takedown. You can use any wrestling technique you want. I will respond naturally, the way I would respond in a real situation. And then, when it is over, we are going to talk about what happened and what it teaches us about martial arts. Does that sound fair?" Tommy nodded, trying to hide his excitement. "Yes, Sensei. That is exactly what I was hoping for." The other students began to gather around, forming a loose circle. Word spread quickly through the studio. Tommy Richardson is going to try to take down Sensei Norris. Within 2 minutes, all 70 students had stopped their activities and were watching. The energy was electric, nervous, anticipation mixed with concern. Some students thought Tommy was brave. Others thought he was foolish. Everyone knew they were about to witness something they would remember forever. Before we see what happened next, I need you to do something for me right now. If you are finding this story engaging, if you want to see how this confrontation unfolds and what lesson it teaches about martial arts, hit that subscribe button immediately. We share stories that reveal the truth about training, about ego, about the journey from beginner to master. Drop a like on this video if you appreciate real martial arts storytelling. And share this with anyone who practices martial arts, anyone who has ever felt overconfident in their skills, anyone who needs to understand that there are always levels beyond what we currently see. Comment below and tell me about a time when you learned a hard lesson in training. Now let us get back to this incredible moment. Chuck removed his shoes and stepped onto the mat. He was wearing a simple black gi, his 6-degree black belt tied around his waist. His movements were relaxed, economical, no wasted energy. He positioned himself in the center of the mat, standing naturally, hands loosely at his sides, weight evenly distributed. He was not in a fighting stance. He was not preparing to defend. He was simply standing, waiting. "Okay, Tommy, whenever you are ready," Chuck said. "Show me your best wrestling shot. Take me down." Tommy moved to a position about 10 feet away. He dropped into a wrestler's stance, weight low, hands up, knees bent. His mind was racing through the techniques he had drilled thousands of times. The double leg takedown was his strongest move. Drive forward explosively, get both hands behind the knees, drive through, take the opponent to the mat. He had hit this successfully against every training partner in the gym. He visualized it working against Chuck, seeing himself getting the takedown, maybe achieving a controlling position, proving his point about wrestling's effectiveness. Tommy took a deep breath and exploded forward. His first 3 steps were fast, powerful, closing the distance. His level change was good, dropping his hips as he drove in. His hands reached for Chuck's legs, aiming to wrap behind both knees. Everything was technically correct, the shot that had worked so many times before. But then, something happened that Tommy's mind could barely process. As his hands reached for the legs, Chuck's body was no longer there. Not because Chuck stepped back or jumped away, but because he moved laterally with a timing so precise that Tommy's momentum carried him past where Chuck had been standing. And in the same motion, as Tommy's body was committed forward, off balance from his explosive drive, Chuck's right hand came down and grasped Tommy's collar at the back of his neck while his left hand secured Tommy's right elbow. What happened next took exactly 9 seconds from Tommy's initial movement, but those 9 seconds contained a lifetime of lessons. Chuck used Tommy's own forward momentum against him, redirecting his energy downward and to the side. Tommy felt his balance completely disappear. His feet could not catch up with where his body was going. Chuck's control of his head and arm meant Tommy could not post or recover. He hit the mat hard, flat on his stomach, the air knocked from his lungs. Before he could even think about escaping, Chuck's knee was on his back, his arm was trapped behind him in a joint lock, and Chuck's other hand controlled his head, pressing his face into the mat. The entire sequence was over so fast that half the students blinked and missed it. One moment Tommy was shooting for the takedown. The next moment he was face down on the mat, completely controlled, unable to move, unable to escape. The studio was absolutely silent. Tommy struggled instinctively, trying to use his wrestling to escape, trying to bridge, trying to turn. But Chuck's position was perfect. Every movement Tommy attempted made the joint lock tighter, made his position worse. After 10 seconds of futile struggling, Tommy tapped the mat twice, the universal signal of submission. Chuck immediately released the pressure but maintained control.
"Are you okay, Tommy? Can you breathe?"
Tommy nodded, gasping, his face red from exertion and embarrassment. Chuck helped Tommy to his feet slowly, keeping a supportive hand on his shoulder. The instructor's face showed no triumph, no mockery, just calm patience. "Everyone stay where you are," Chuck said to the watching students. "This is a teaching moment for all of us, not just for Tommy." Tommy stood there, trying to process what had just happened. His wrestling takedown, the technique he had perfected over years, had been completely neutralized. Not just stopped, but turned against him in a way that left him helpless. Chuck stepped back and addressed the entire class. "What just happened here is important for everyone to understand," Chuck began, his voice carrying clearly across the training floor. "Tommy came to me with a legitimate question. He has been working hard on his wrestling, and he wanted to know how it would fare against karate. That is a good question. That shows a thinking martial artist. But what Tommy discovered, and what I want all of you to understand, is that martial arts is not about individual techniques being superior to other techniques. It is about understanding, experience, timing, and most importantly, knowing how to adapt." Chuck gestured to Tommy.
"Tommy is strong.
His wrestling fundamentals are solid. His shoot was technically correct. If I was standing there like a karate statue, just waiting for him, his takedown might have worked. But that is not what martial arts is about. Real martial arts means reading your opponent's intentions, recognizing the attack before it is fully committed, and having enough experience to know exactly how to respond. I did not stop Tommy's wrestling with karate techniques. I used Tommy's own energy and momentum against him, which is a principle that exists in every effective martial art, from judo to aikido to traditional kung fu to Brazilian jiu-jitsu." Tommy listened, his breathing returning to normal, his ego deflating but his mind opening. Chuck continued, looking directly at him now. "Tommy, your mistake was not in your technique. Your wrestling is good. Your mistake was in your assumption. You assumed that because you had success against students at your level, you understood enough to challenge someone with 10 times your experience. You thought that your 18 months of training and your wrestling background gave you insight that I, with 20 years of martial arts training and thousands of real encounters, somehow lacked. That is not confidence. That is arrogance. And arrogance is the most dangerous weakness a martial artist can have because it stops you from learning." The words hit Tommy hard, but he recognized the truth in them. "Sensei, I am sorry," Tommy said quietly. "You are right. I was arrogant. I thought I knew more than I did." Chuck smiled and put his hand on Tommy's shoulder again. "The fact that you can recognize that and admit it shows you have potential to become a great martial artist. Most people cannot acknowledge their errors. They make excuses. They blame the circumstances. But you are standing here, accepting the lesson. That takes character. Now, do you want to understand what actually happened?" Tommy nodded eagerly.
"Yes, please."
"I barely saw what you did." Chuck called one of his senior black belts onto the mat. "Watch carefully, everyone." Chuck had the black belt perform a slow-motion double-leg shot while he explained and demonstrated his response in detail. When you see the level change, you see the forward drive, you have a split second to respond. Most people try to sprawl, to throw their hips back and drive the attacker's head down. That works sometimes. But there is a better option if your timing is good enough. As he commits forward, you move at an angle. Not straight back, but to the side. This does two things. First, it takes your legs away from his target. Second, it puts you in position to control his head and arm. Chuck demonstrated again, this time with more speed. Once you control the head and arm during his committed forward motion, he is helpless. His momentum is working against him. You redirect him downward, and he cannot recover because his base is gone and you control his structure. Then you transition to the pin and the submission. This is not magic. This is timing and understanding of body mechanics. But it takes thousands of repetitions and real experience to develop the sensitivity and reaction speed to pull it off against a committed attack. The students watched in fascination as Chuck broke down the sequence step by step, having different black belts attack him with various wrestling takedowns, showing multiple responses and explaining the principles behind each. Tommy watched with complete focus, his earlier confidence replaced with genuine humility and hunger to learn. After 30 minutes of detailed instruction, Chuck brought the class back together. "The lesson for tonight is this," Chuck said, looking at each student in turn. "There are no superior martial arts, only superior martial artists. Wrestling is effective.
Karate is effective. Judo is effective.
Boxing is effective. But effectiveness depends on the practitioner, on their understanding, their adaptability, their experience. When you are young in your training, it is natural to be excited about what you are learning, to believe your style or your techniques are the best. But as you mature, you realize that every system has value, and the wise martial artist learns from all of them." Chuck looked at Tommy specifically. "Tommy, you have a good foundation in wrestling.
Do not abandon that.
But add to it. Learn the striking that karate offers. Learn the joint locks and control techniques. Learn how different systems address different problems. Become a complete martial artist, not just a wrestler who does some karate. And most importantly, stay humble. Always remember there is someone with more experience, more knowledge, more skill. The moment you think you have figured it all out is the moment you stop growing." The class ended with everyone bowing respectfully, but students lingered afterward, talking about what they had witnessed, processing the lessons. Tommy approached Chuck privately after most people had left. "Sensei, I want to apologize again. And I want to thank you. You could have really hurt me, could have embarrassed me in front of everyone. But instead you taught me something I will never forget."
Chuck smiled. "Tommy, I was you once.
When I was a green belt, I thought I was pretty good. I challenged people who had more experience than me, and I learned hard lessons. Those lessons made me better. Today was your hard lesson. What matters is what you do with it. Will you let it crush your spirit, or will you let it fuel your growth?" Tommy met his teacher's eyes. "It will fuel my growth.
I promise." Chuck nodded. "Good."
Then today was a success. Over the following years, Tommy Richardson would become one of Chuck Norris's most dedicated students, eventually earning his black belt and becoming an instructor himself. But he never forgot that Monday evening in September when his confidence was checked, his assumptions were shattered, and he learned the difference between thinking you know and actually knowing. He would tell the story to his own students decades later, not as a tale of defeat, but as a story about the importance of humility in martial arts. The encounter between Tommy and Chuck became somewhat famous in the Dallas martial arts community, but not because Chuck Norris dominated a lower belt, that was expected. It became famous because of how Chuck handled it, turning what could have been a humiliating moment into a teaching opportunity that elevated not just Tommy but every student who witnessed it. Instructors from other schools would reference the incident when talking about the right way to deal with overconfident students, about the importance of teaching rather than just winning. Years later, in interviews about his teaching philosophy, Chuck Norris would occasionally mention this incident. "There is a fine line between confidence and arrogance in martial arts," he said in one interview. "Confidence is knowing what you can do based on realistic assessment of your skills. Arrogance is believing you are better than you are, usually because your experience is limited and you have not yet faced people who can expose your weaknesses. As an instructor, your job is not to crush the arrogant student, but to educate them. To show them reality in a way that opens their mind rather than closes it. That is what I tried to do with Tommy. I could have hurt him, could have made him look foolish. But what would that teach? Instead, I showed him what he did not know, explained why it happened, and invited him to learn more. That is what martial arts teaching should be." The story also highlighted something important about Chuck Norris's own journey in martial arts. By 1975, he had already retired from competition and was transitioning into film and teaching. He could have rested on his laurels, could have stayed narrowly focused on Tang Soo Do and traditional karate.
But he did not.
He was constantly studying other systems, training with experts in judo, wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, boxing, any art that could teach him something new. This cross-training mentality, which was unusual for traditional martial artists of that era, gave him a complete understanding of fighting that went beyond any single style. That is what allowed him to neutralize Tommy's wrestling so effectively. He understood wrestling because he had studied it, had trained with wrestlers, had integrated useful elements into his own system. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you something important. If this story has given you a new perspective on martial arts, on humility, on the importance of continuous learning, then I need you to take action right now. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already. We share stories that go beyond surface-level martial arts content, stories that teach principles that apply to life, not just fighting. Hit that like button to help this video reach more people who need to hear this message. And share it widely. Share it with martial arts students who might be getting overconfident. Share it with instructors who want to understand better teaching methods. Share it with anyone who appreciates stories about personal growth through challenge. Comment below and tell me your biggest takeaway from this story. What lesson from Tommy's experience with Chuck Norris resonates most with you? I read every comment, and I love hearing how these stories impact you. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next video where we will explore more incredible moments from martial arts history. Tommy Richardson's transformation after that evening became an inspiration in itself. He threw himself into training with renewed dedication, but this time with humility replacing arrogance. He asked questions constantly. He sought out training partners who were better than him rather than those he could dominate. He attended seminars in other martial arts, studying judo, aikido, and later Brazilian jiu-jitsu as it became more prominent in the United States. His wrestling remained his foundation, but he built a complete martial arts education on top of it. By the time he earned his black belt 6 years later, he was a completely different martial artist than the green belt who had challenged Chuck Norris. He understood not just techniques but principles, not just how to win but how to learn from both victories and defeats. When Tommy eventually opened his own school, he made sure to share the story of his encounter with Chuck Norris with every new class of students. He did not hide his mistake or make excuses. He owned it completely and used it to teach the same lessons Chuck had taught him. Humility in training, respect for experience, understanding that martial arts is a lifelong journey with no shortcuts. His students appreciated his honesty, his willingness to show his own flaws, and many of them became exceptional martial artists themselves because they absorbed those early lessons about ego and growth. The broader lesson from this story extends beyond martial arts. In any field, any discipline, any pursuit of mastery, there is a phase where a little bit of knowledge creates dangerous overconfidence. You know enough to be effective against beginners, and this success tricks you into thinking you understand more than you do. The truly wise recognize this phase and actively seek out people who are better, situations that challenge them, experiences that reveal their limitations. They understand that discomfort and even occasional defeat are necessary for growth.
They seek teachers, not just opponents.
They ask questions, not just make statements. This mindset separates those who plateau early from those who continue improving throughout their lives. Chuck Norris exemplified this wisdom. Despite being a 6-time world champion, despite achieving the highest levels of success in competitive karate, he never stopped learning. He trained with Bruce Lee, absorbing lessons about efficiency and directness. He studied with judoka, learning about leverage and off-balancing. He worked with boxers to improve his hand techniques. He approached martial arts not as someone who had all the answers but as someone committed to finding better questions. This humility, this openness to learning, this respect for knowledge wherever it came from, made him not just a great fighter but a great teacher. The way he handled Tommy was not about defending his ego or proving his superiority. It was about creating a moment of genuine education that would benefit his student for a lifetime. That is mastery, not just of techniques but of teaching itself, not just of the physical aspects of martial arts but of the character development that should accompany them. The story of Tommy Richardson and Chuck Norris reminds us that the most valuable lessons in martial arts, and in life, often come from moments of humility. When we are forced to confront our limitations, when our assumptions are tested and found wanting, when we experience firsthand the gap between where we are and where we thought we were, we have a choice. We can become defensive, make excuses, retreat into our comfort zone. Or we can open our minds, acknowledge what we do not know, and commit to the hard work of genuine improvement. Tommy chose the latter, and it made all the difference. His 9 seconds on the mat, face down, controlled completely by his teacher, became the foundation for decades of growth. That is the real power of martial arts training when it is done correctly, not just learning how to fight but learning how to learn, how to handle defeat, how to transform ego into humility and humility into wisdom.